It's interesting reading a book that you read when you're like 16. So you reread a book you read when you're 16, and we can vaguely remember it. But we thought we were thoroughly through, or that we were done with Thoreau and had thrown it away. But it turns out we're not through with Thoreau, even though I thought I had done a thorough job. So why aren't we done? Why am I not reading? Why I have to read again when I read it when I was 16? I read it when I was 16 years old. But everyone's read it at 16. But if it's required reading, it's not the same as reading for pleasure. I read it for pleasure. I may have gotten pleasure from it. But I think we all need to learn economy in this new age. So I like the first chapter of Walden. We had read the last chapter of Walden, but the first comes last. So we're going to read the first chapter. It was a long road to Walden. The two men helped Thoreau on his way, one with an action, the other with ideas. One was Stearns Wheeler. He built a hut on a pondy shore near Concord, and for 6 weeks during their college days, Thoreau stayed with him there as his guest. The other was Emerson. When in 1836 he published his little book, Nature, it became almost at once the Bible of transcendentalism. Clearly Thoreau read it with closest attention. Its ideas informed his early writing, but he went on to pen many hundreds of pages to pass many years before finally sending the manuscript to Walden to the printer. Thoreau reshaped it 7 times after leaving his hut. At the end of the book was uniquely his. Ticknor and Fields issued it in August 1854. By then, transcendentalism was a dying movement, but its greatest document was at last in type. Is this the greatest document of transcendentalism? Could argue that. That's the introduction to Walden. The greatest document of transcendentalism. What's amazing is it's in English and accessible. When I wrote the following pages, or rather the bulk of them, I lived alone in the woods, a mile from any neighbor, in a house which I had built myself on the shore of Walden Pond, in Concord, Massachusetts, and earned my living by the labor of my hands only. That tells you the whole story. I lived there 2 years and 2 months. At present I am a sojourner in civilized life again. I should not obtrude my affairs so much on the notice of my readers if very particular inquiries have not been made by my townsmen concerning my mode of life, which some would call impertinent, though they do not appear to me at all impertinent, but considering the circumstances, very natural and pertinent. Do you think the way he lived was very natural? Some have asked what I got to eat, if I did not feel lonesome, if I was not afraid, and the like. Others have been curious to learn what portion of my income I devoted to charitable purposes, and some who have large families, how many poor children I maintained. I will therefore ask those of my readers who feel no particular interest in me to pardon me if I undertake to answer some of these questions in this book. Remember how people came and asked him what he was doing there? He was just there, and he stuck out. He wasn't in hiding. He created a spectacle. And so he had to write a book to explain what he was doing in the woods. In most books, the I, or first person, is omitted. In this, it will be retained. In respect to egotism is the main difference. We commonly do not remember that it is, after all, always the first person that is speaking. You see, in reality, you can get rid of the I, but in fact, there still is one, because who's writing the book? I could say there was no I, but it'd still be there. I should not talk so much about myself if there were anybody else whom I knew as well. Unfortunately, I am confined to this theme by the narrowness of my experience. Moreover, I, on my side, require of every writer, first or last, a simple and sincere account of his own life. Here he requires a simple account of your own life. Do you have a simple account? Where's your simple account? I'm applying this. It says, moreover, I, on my side, require every writer, first or last, a simple and sincere account of his own life, and not merely what he has heard of other men's lives. Some such account as he would send to his kindred from a distant land. For if he has lived sincerely, have you lived sincerely? It must have been in a distant land to me. Perhaps these pages are more particularly addressed to poor students. That's where it comes in when you read this at page 16. It's good for poor students. As for the rest of my readers, they will accept such portions as apply to them. I trust that none will stretch the seams in putting on the coat, for it may do good service to him whom it fits. I would fain say something not so much concerning the Chinese and Sandwich Islanders as you who read these pages who are said to live in New England. Something about your condition, especially your outward condition, or circumstances in this world, in this town. What is it? Whether it is necessary that it be as bad as it is, whether it cannot be improved as well as not. I have traveled a great deal in Concord. He traveled quite extensively just in the town of Concord. And everywhere, in shops, offices, and fields, the inhabitants have appeared to me to be doing penance in 1,000 remarkable ways. What I have heard of Brahmins sitting exposed to 4 fires and looking in the face of the sun, or hanging suspended with their heads downward over flames, or looking at the heavens over their shoulders, until it becomes impossible for them to resume their natural position, while from the twist of the neck nothing but liquids can pass into the stomach. Unquote. Or dwelling, chained for life, at the foot of a tree, or measuring with their bodies like caterpillars the breadth of vast empires, or stretching on one leg on the tops of pillars. Even these forms of conscious penance are hardly more incredible and astonishing than the scenes which I daily witness. He had read about Indian books, India, from the Vedas or the Upanishads. The 12 labors of Hercules were trifling in comparison. with those which my neighbors have undertaken, for they were only 12, and had an end. But I could never see that these men slew or captured any monster or finished any labor. They have no friend, Iolaus, to burn with a hot iron the root of the hydra's head. But as soon as one head is crushed to spring up, do we never finish any of our labors? And when we do, does something spring up again? Seems it just springs up. When I finish something, something else just pops up. I see young men, my townsmen, whose misfortune it is to have inherited farms. It's misfortunate if you inherit a farm. Houses, barns, cattle, and farming tools, for these are more easily acquired than got rid of. It can be hard to get rid of things, but better if they had been born in the open pasture and suckled by a wolf, that they might have seen with clear eyes what field they were called to labor in. Who made them serfs of the soil? Why should they eat their 60 acres, when man is condemned to eat only his peck of dirt? Why should they begin digging their graves as soon as they are born? They have got to live a man's life, pushing all these things before them, and get on as well as they can. How many a poor immortal soul have I met, well nigh crushed and smothered under its load, creeping down the road of life, pushing before it a barn, 75 feet by 40, its Auguion stables, never cleansed, 100 acres of land, tillage, mowing, pasture, and woodlot. The portionless, who struggle with no such unnecessary inherited encumbrances, find it labor enough to subdue and cultivate a few cubic feet of flesh. Do we cultivate a few cubic feet of flesh like our body? Cultivate it by eating. We technically maintain a physical body. This could be like your farm, I guess. If you were a yogi, you would probably be farming your body. But men labor under a mistake. Do you think life is a mistake? The better part of the man is soon plowed into the soil for compost. By a seeming fate commonly called necessity, they are employed, as it says in an old book, laying up treasures which moth and rust will corrupt, and thieves break through and steal. It is a fool's life. Do you think it's some sorrow, like a big trick or a big illusion, I guess? It is a fool's life, as they will find when they get to the end of it, if not before. It is said that Deucalion, and Pyrrha treated men by throwing stones over their heads behind them. Ide genus durum sumus expericum liberum e documata damus qua sumus e regine nati. Or as the Raleigh rhymes it in his sonorous way, quote, from hence our kind-hearted kind, from whence our kind hard-hearted is, enduring pain and care, approving that our bodies of a stony nature are. So much for a blind obedience to blundering oracles, throwing the stones over their heads behind them, and not seeing where they fell. Most men, even in this comparatively free country, through mere ignorance and mistake, are so occupied with the fastidious cares, fastidious, factitious cares, and superfluously coarse labors of life, that its finer fruits cannot be plucked by them. Only a lucky few ever get to the greater graces of God, I guess, or even fine literature where you get at Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. Their fingers from excessive toil. I guess they just work themselves to death as a product of that work ethics. Their fingers from excessive toil are too clumsy and tremble too much for that. Actually, the laboring man has no leisure for a true integrity day by day. He cannot afford to sustain the manliest relations to men. His labor would be depreciated in the market. He has no time to be anything but a machine. There's no time. You think if we got a lot of machines, so we could have more free time. But the machines did everything. But how can he remember his ignorance, which his growth requires, who has so often to use his knowledge? We should feed and clothe him gratuitously sometimes, and recruit him with our cordials before we judge him. The finest qualities of our nature, like the bloom on fruits, can be preserved only by the most delicate handling. Yet we do not treat ourselves nor one another thus tenderly. Some of you, we all know, are poor, find it hard to live, at some times, as it were, grasping for breath. I have no doubt that some of you who read this book are unable to pay for all the dinners which you have actually eaten, or for the coats and shoes which are fast wearing or are already worn out, and have come to this page to spend borrowed or stolen time, robbing your creditors of an hour. Do you think we should be paying our creditors and not reading this? It is very evident what mean and sneaking lives many of you live, for my sight has been whetted by experience, always on the limits, trying to get into business and trying to get out of debt. A very ancient slough, called by the Latin ius alium, and others brass, for some of their coins were made of brass, still living and dying, buried by this other's brass, always promising to pay tomorrow, and dying today, insolvent, seeking to curry favor, to get custom by how many modes, only not state prison of offenses, lying, flattering, voting, contracting yourselves into a nutshell of civility, or dilating into an atmosphere of thin and vaporous generosity, that you may persuade your neighbor to let you make his shoes, or his hat, or his coat, or his carriage, or import his groceries for him, making yourselves sick, that you may lay up something against a sick day, something to be tucked away in an old chest, or a stocking behind the plastering, or more safely in the brick bank, no matter where, no matter how much or how little. Hmm. Hmm. Seems that Americans haven't learned this basic hmm, scripture. Is this American scripture? I sometimes wonder that we can be so frivolous. Frivolous. I may almost say, as to attend to the gross but somewhat foreign form of servitude called Negro slavery, there are so many keen and subtle masters that enslave both North and South. That's just one form of slavery. There's many forms, right? You enslave yourself by your own desires. That's slavery. It is hard to have a southerner overseer. It is worse to have a northern one. But worst of all, when you are the slave driver of yourself. Do you slave drive yourself? Talk of a divinity in man. Look at the teamster on the highway, wending to market by day or night. Does any divinity stir within him? His highest duty to fodder and water his horses. What is his destiny to him compared with the shipping interest? Does not he drive for squire make a stir? How godlike, how immortal is he! Remember, there was a road that passed by Walden, and there may be teamsters on the highway that stopped by to see passerbys on the highway, stopped by to see Henry in his house on Walden Pond. See how he cowers and sneaks, how vaguely all the day he fears, not being immortal nor divine, but the slave and the prisoner of his own opinion of himself. A fame won by his own deeds. Are you imprisoned by your opinion of yourself? I'm imprisoned by my opinion of myself. So we're talking about my imprisonment. And the reason why I'm reading Walden is to get out of prison. Public opinion is a weak tyrant compared with our own private opinion. What a man thinks of himself, that it is which determines, or rather indicates his fate. Self-emancipation, even in the West Indian provinces of the fancy and imagination. What Wilberforce is there to bring that about? What was a Wilberforce? It's like a power, something. Think also of the ladies of the land, weaving toilet cushions against the last day, not to betray too green an interest in their fates, as if you could kill time without injuring eternity. When we kill time, are we injuring eternity? Let's say we just like killed time watching television. Did we injure eternity? Hmm. Hmm. Guess you could have been in deep transcendental meditation instead. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Of course, that's a famous line. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. From the desperate city you go into the desperate country and have to console yourself with the bravery of minks and muskrats. A stereotyped but unconscious despair is concealed even under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There is no play in them, for this comes after work, but it is a characteristic of wisdom not to do desperate things. Hmm. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. From the desperate city you go into the desperate country and have to console yourself with the bravery of minks and muskrats. A stereotyped but unconscious despair is concealed even under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There is no play in them, for this comes after work, but it is a characteristic of wisdom not to do desperate things. When we consider what, to use the words of the Catechism, is the chief end of man, and what are the true necessaries, and means of life, it appears as if men had deliberately chosen the common mode of living because they preferred it to any other. Yet they honestly think there is no choice left. But alert and healthy natures remember that the sun rose clear. It is never too late to give up our prejudices. No way of thinking or doing, however ancient, can be trusted without proof. What everybody echoes or in silence passes by as true today may turn out to be falsehood tomorrow, mere smoke of opinion which some had trusted for a cloud that would sprinkle fertilizing rain on the fields. What old people say you cannot do, you try and find that you can. Old deeds for old people, and new deeds for new. Old people do not know enough once, perchance, to fetch fresh fuel to keep the fire a-going. New people put a little dry wood under a pot and are whirled around the globe with the speed of birds, in a way to kill old people, as the phrase is. Age is no better, hardly so well qualified for an instructor as youth, for it has not profited so much as it has lost. One may almost doubt if the wisest man has learned anything of absolute value by living. Practically, the old have no very important advice to give the young. Their own experience has been so partial, and their lives have been such miserable failures for private reasons, as they must believe, and it may be that they have some faith left which belies that experience, and they are only less young than they were. I have lived some 30 years on this planet, and I have yet to hear the first syllable of valuable or even earnest advice from my seniors. They have told me nothing, and probably cannot tell me anything to the purpose. Here is life, an experiment to a great extent untried by me, but it does not avail me that they have tried it. If I have any experience which I think valuable, I am sure to reflect that this my mentor said nothing about. One farmer says to me, quote, "You cannot live on vegetable food solely, for it furnishes nothing to make bones with." Is that the common wisdom or the bon mot? One farmer says to me, "You cannot live on vegetable food solely, for it furnishes nothing to make bones with." Unquote. This is questioning vegan philosophy. And so he religiously devotes a part of his day to supplying his system with the raw material of bones, walking all the while he talks behind his oxen, which with vegetable-made bones jerk him and his lumbering plow along in spite of every obstacle, despite the fact that the ox are made out of vegetables. Some things are really necessaries of life in some circles, the most helpless and diseased, which in others are luxuries merely, and in others still are entirely unknown. The whole ground of human life seems to some to have been gone over by their predecessors. Both the heights and the valleys and all things have been cared for, according to Evelyn. Quote, "The wise Solomon prescribed ordinances for the very distances of trees, and the Roman praetors have decided how often you may go into your neighbor's land to gather the acorns which fall on it without trespass, and what share belongs to that neighbor." Unquote. Hippocrates has even left directions how we should cut our nails, that is, even with the ends of the fingers, neither shorter nor longer. Undoubtedly, the Vertidium and Inui, which presume to have exhausted the variety and the joys of life, are as old as Adam. But man's capacities have never been measured, nor are we to judge what he can do by any precedents. So little has been tried. Whatever have been their failures hitherto, quote, "Be not afflicted, my child, for who shall assign to thee what thou hast left undone?" Unquote. We might try our lives by 1,000 simple tests, as for instance, that the same sun which ripens my beans illuminates at once a system of earths like ours. If I had remembered this, I would have prevented some mistakes. This is not the light in which I hold them. The stars are the apexes of what wonderful triangles, what distant and different beings in the various mansions of the universe are contemplating the same one at the same moment. You think there's a multiverse or different universes? Nature and human life are as various as our several constitutions. Who shall say what prospect life offers to another? Can a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? Question mark. We should live in all the ages of the world in an hour. In all the worlds of the ages. History, poetry, mythology. I know of no reading of another's experience so startling and informing as this would be. The greater part of what my neighbors call good, I believe in my soul to be bad. Do you think that, like, everything that people believe that the opposite was true? The world was upside down. I remember when I was a kid, I thought that everything may be completely upside down. The greater part of what my neighbors call good, I believe in my soul to be bad, and if I repent of anything, it is very likely to be my good behavior. What demon possessed me that I behave so well? You may say, the wisest thing you can, old man. You who have lived 70 years, not without honor of a kind. I hear an irresistible voice which invites me away from all that. One generation abandons the enterprises of another like stranded vessels. You went there only at about age 30 and only lived to 44. Never made it to 70. How would he know? I think that we may safely trust a good deal more than we do. We may waive just so much care of ourselves as we honestly bestow elsewhere. Nature is as well adapted to our weakness as to our strength. The incessant anxiety and strain of some is a well-nigh incurable form of disease. We are made to exaggerate the importance of what work we do. Yet how much is not done by us? Or what if we had been taken sick? How vigilant we are, determined not to live by faith if we can avoid it. All the day long on the alert, at night we unwillingly say our prayers and commit ourselves to uncertainties. So thoroughly and sincerely are we compelled to live, reverencing our life and denying the possibility of change. This is the only way, we say, but there are as many ways as there can be drawn radii from one center. All change is a miracle to contemplate. Do you think that all change is a miracle and that we can contemplate all change as a miracle? Can every single day be a miracle? But it is a miracle which is taking place every instant. Confucius said, quote, to know that we know what we know, and that we do not know what we do not know, that is true knowledge. To know that we know what we know, and that we do not know what we do not know, that is true knowledge. When one man has reduced a fact of the imagination to a fact to his understanding, I foresee that all men will at length establish their lives on that basis. Let us consider for a moment what most of the trouble and anxiety which I have referred to is about, and how much it is necessary that we be troubled, or at least careful. It would be some advantage to live a primitive and frontier life, though in the midst of an outward civilization, if only to learn what are the gross necessaries of life, and what methods have been taken to obtain them, or even to look over the old day books of the merchants and see what it was that men most commonly bought at the stores, what they stored, that is, what are the grossest groceries, for the improvements of ages have had but little influence on the essential laws of man's existence, as our skeletons probably are not to be distinguished from those of our ancestors. By the words necessary of life, I mean whatever of all that man obtains by his own exertions has been from the first and from long use has become so important to human life that few, if any, whether from savageness or poverty or philosophy, ever attempted to without it. He's looking for the hardcore basic necessities of life. Well, he's going to go on to talk about simplicity. He's like an early minimalist, I suppose. To many creatures there is, in a sense, but one necessary of life, food. Alright, so we need food at least every other day. To the bison of the prairie it is a few inches of palatable grass with water to drink, unless he seeks the shelter of the forest or the mountain shadow. None of the brute creation requires more than food and shelter. The necessaries of life for man in this climate may, accurately enough, be distributed under the several heads of food, shelter, clothing, and fuel. After you travel in a third world country, you realize it's good to have. You'll be glad when you have a flush toilet and hot water for a shower and heat, I guess. Don't need air conditioning, probably. That's a luxurious. For not till we have secured these are we prepared to entertain the true problems of life with freedom and a prospect of success. Man has invented not only houses, but clothes and cooked food, and possibly from the accidental discovery of the warmth of fire and the consequent use of it. At first the luxury arose the present necessity to sit by it. Yeah, they think people that the comfort you feel sitting by the fireplace is like sort of ingrained from all those years being a caveman. Because the caveman were comfortable by the fire, probably. We observe cats and dogs acquiring the same second nature. By proper shelter and clothing, we legitimately retain our own internal heat. But with an excess of these, or of fuel, that is, with an external heat greater than our own internal, may not cookery properly be said to begin. Darwin, the naturalist, says of the inhabitants of Tierra del Fuego that while his own party, who were well clothed and sitting close to a fire, were far from too warm, these naked savages, who were further off, were observed, to his great surprise, to be streaming with perspiration at undergoing such a roasting. So we are told the New Hollander goes naked with impunity, while the European shivers in his clothes. It is impossible to combine the hardiness of these savages with the intellectualness of the civilized man? Question mark. Is it possible? Hmm. He's asking if it's possible to make a hardy intellectual. Hmm. Is it possible to combine the hardiness of these savages with the intellectualness of the civilized man? According to Liebig, man's body is a stove, and the food and the fuel which keeps up the internal combustion in the lungs. In cold weather we eat more, in warm less. The animal heat is the result of a slow combustion, and disease and death take place when this is too rapid, and for want of fuel, or from some defect in the draught, the fire goes out. Hmm. Yeah, most disease and sickness comes from eating too much. Mm, mm, mm. Of course, the vital heat is not to be confounded with fire, but so much for analogy. It appears, therefore, from the above list that the expression animal life is nearly synonymous with the expression animal heat. For while food may be regarded as the fuel which keeps up the fire within us, the fuel serves only to prepare that food and to increase the warmth of our bodies by addition from without. Shelter and clothing also serve only to retain the heat thus generated and absorbed. Hmm. They seem concerned with the heat in a way. Though in modern times you could probably get heated clothing or specialized clothing for mountain climbing. Get 3 layers of silk. Could go to Uniqlo and get some long underwear, I guess. Hmm. The grand necessity, then, for our bodies is to keep warm, to keep the vital heat in us. What pains we accordingly take, not only with our food and clothing and shelter, but with our beds, which are our night clothes, robbing the nest and breast of birds to prepare the shelter within a shelter, as the mole has its bed of grass and leaves at the end of its burrow. Hmm. We take the down from ducks to get down coats. Or do we take furs to get fur coats? The poor man is wont to complain that this is a cold world, and too cold. No less physical than social, we refer directly a great part of our ails. The summer, in some climates, makes possible to man a sort of Elysian life. Fuel, except to cook his food, is then unnecessary. The sun is his fire, and many of the fruits are sufficiently cooked by its rays, while food generally is more various and more easily obtained, and the clothing and shelter are wholly or half unnecessary. Right, you could just live in Hawaii. Might as well just go to Hawaii. At the present day, and in this country, as I find by my own experience, a few implements, a knife, an axe, a spade, a wheelbarrow. Hmm. Wheelbarrow can be good. For gardening work. This is like you need a spade and for the studious lamplight, stationery, and access to a few books. Mm, when I went out to the Smith farm and I had huts in the woods with books and lights and little small huts. You could have a hut in the woods behind. You could have a house, but then have a meditation hut in the woods with all these things. Few books ranked next to necessaries, and can all be obtained at a trifling cost. Yet some, not wise, go to the other side of the globe to barbarous and unhealthy regions and devote themselves to trade for 10 or 20 years, in order that they may live and keep comfortably warm, and die in New England at last. The luxuriously rich are not simply kept comfortably warm, but unnaturally hot, as I implied before. They are cooked, of course, a la mode. Most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only not indispensable, but positive hindrances in the elevation of mankind. With respect to luxuries and comforts, the wisest have ever lived a more simple and meager life than the poor. The ancient philosophers, Chinese, Hindu, Persian, and Greek, were a class than which none has been poor in outward riches, none so rich in inward. We know not much about them. It is remarkable that we know so much of them as we do. The same is true of the more modern reformers and benefactors of the race. None can be an impartial or wise observer of human life, but from the vantage ground of what we should call voluntary poverty. Of a life of luxury, the fruit is luxury. Whether in agriculture or commerce or literature or art, there are nowadays professors of philosophy, but not philosophers like Henry. Yet it is admirable to profess, because it was once admirable to live. To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school, but so to love wisdom as to live according to its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically. The success of great scholars and thinkers is commonly a courtier-like success, not kingly, but manly. They make shift to live merely by conformity, practically as their fathers did, and are in no sense the progenitors of a nobler race of men. But why do men degenerate ever? What makes families run out? What is the nature of the luxury which enervates and destroys nations? Are we sure that there is none of it in our own lives? The philosopher is in advance of his age, even in the outward form of his life. He is not fed, sheltered, clothed, warmed like his contemporaries. How can a man be a philosopher and not maintain his vital heat by better methods than other men? page 270. We're stopping at that part of chapter 1, economy. Economy goes on and on. It's appropriately called economy, I guess. The 1 hour mark. I was reading the beginning of Walden and the chapter on economy in Henry David Thoreau, doing it more thoroughly going through Thoreau before I get thrown out of Thoreau. I'm doing a thorough reading. Thoreau. I'm not through yet.